exciting. These are good classes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do our introductions. And you can come up and get your samples of the different breads. Don't let me stop you. Okay, so this is our sourdough. Oops. Go back to it.
Whoa, look at that. Oh, that's amazing. Wow. What's his name?
Carl Jr.
I knew it. Everyone needs a sourdough.
So this is our sourdough bread making
Trixie.
class, and it's with my glasses on, Mikelle, Roach, and Ashlan Court. So Mikelle, this is her little bio, and it says, I'm from Cottonwood Heights. I have a degree in psychology from BYU, although most of my work has been in project management and operations. I met my husband at BYU. He's from San Diego, and we lived in Atlanta for a short time after college. We miss the South, but love being around family and friends in Utah. We have a 6-year-old daughter and a son who is almost 3. I show my love for others through baked goods and often spend most of the day in the kitchen. I love to travel the world and eat good food. I dream of going to culinary school someday. I started my first sourdough starter in 2020 along with the rest of the country. But when my son was born in June of that year, I could only keep one of them alive. And she made a good choice. She chose her son. Ashlan gave me my starter earlier this year, and she's thriving. I love the nutrition that sourdough provides and love how much better my sensitive stomach feels when I eat it. And then Ashlan Court. I am a health and fitness fanatic. I am so passionate about food and cooking and believe that what we put in our bodies will have immediate and long-lasting effects for the better if we are conscious and educated on it. I've been married to my amazing husband for 10 years, and we have 2 beautiful children. Cal is 3 and Kennedy is 1. I'm a Northern California native, but have lived in Utah for 15 years and love it. I played volleyball at Utah State University. Go Aggies. That was in there. I love the ocean, traveling, and fresh homemade sourdough bread right out of the oven. So here is our next class.
Thank you guys for being here. So like she was saying, I have been baking for probably 20 years, but I am fairly new to sourdough, but I'm going kind of crazy on it. So I love it. It's awesome. And Ashlan is more of an expert with sourdough.
No, I'm not. It's like so crazy because at first I feel like when you hear all the terminology and how it works, it's like, what are you talking about? Like this like starter thinking like makes no sense. But once you understand it and grasp it, it is so simple. Yeah. It truly is. And then you can just do anything with it. It's so easy. You really just need 3 ingredients. You just need flour, water, and salt, and that is it, which is so nice. You don't have to store a bunch of things. And yeah, no, I love it. I'm excited.
And if you're feeling overwhelmed by sourdough at all, I'm going to recommend that you don't join any like Facebook groups for sourdough, because they're going to be talking about like your autolyse period, your like hydration percentage, and it's overwhelming at first. So like you can get there later if you want, but start with the basics and like get a handle on it first.
Yes, I completely agree. Yes.
So do I do this? So about sourdough, I'm doing this one, right? Okay.
Start.
So sourdough, it is naturally fermented yeast, and it's a wild occurring yeast that happens when you combine flour and water and let it ferment. And it's a completely natural process, and it becomes the rising agent in the bread. You can use different kinds of flour for sourdough. The basic one is obviously going to be an unbleached all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour, which is a higher protein content. But you can also use different flours. You can use kamut, which is an ancient Khorasan flour. You can use rye, and you can also add different flours into your starter depending on what your starter needs later on. You can mix any ingredients that you want into your bread with sourdough. You can add in jalapenos, cheese, honey, nuts, seeds. All those are great. I have a friend who does chocolate chip loaves all the time, raisin loaves. I know that some people have strong opinions on that. I think raisins are wonderful. Sourdough, the way that it is fickle is it does not like chemicals. And I know you can get technical, salt is a chemical, but it doesn't like iodine. It doesn't like chlorine. So you need to make sure that the salt you're using for it is not a table salt. It needs to be a sea salt. We like Redmond pure salt. I also really like, you can get really nice French gray salts, and you can even, I use Fleur de Sel. I know it's a topping salt, but I use it in my loaves sometimes. So you just want a pure salt, and it's also important that the water that you use when you're feeding your starter and the water that you use when you're making your loaf, it needs to not have chlorine in it. And there is chlorine in your tap water. So you need to use filtered water, whether that's coming from bottled water. I have a reverse osmosis filter at my house, so I use that for it. If you don't have access to filtered water, the best thing you can do is fill up your pitcher of tap water and let it sit for at least 24 hours so it can off-gas the chlorine. Yes, sourdough does have to follow some rules, but there is a lot of wiggle room to it, and as you start to get your hands into it and you start to feel more comfortable, you can test around different ratios and different bake times, and just get to a point where it's kind of what you feel comfortable with. And there are also so many different recipes and variations, methods for sourdough, so you kind of just find what works well for you.
Okay, health benefits, which is like what I love most about it, because there are some people who are gluten intolerant and can't eat a lot of things that hurts their bellies. The great thing about this is that it is better for you, for people who have struggle eating gluten. So the fermentation of wheat unlocks B vitamins. It's full of prebiotics and probiotics. So as you're doing this process, you're gonna let it ferment. If you're doing it on the counter, it's going to take about 24 hours for the whole process to work, and that's because it's sitting on the counter and fermenting, which is going to load it with all of those prebiotics and probiotics, which is great for your gut. Improves the digestion of gluten. Like I said, some people who are gluten intolerant can eat sourdough. Antioxidant and anti-hypertensive. Those are big words.
Lowers your blood pressure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Lower glycemic index than non-fermented breads. Okay, and this is my favorite. If you don't use you guys know like the grass-fed Kerrygold butter. It is life-changing. You can't go back once you switch. You can get the Costco brand at Costco as well, and it's a little cheaper than the Kerrygold. But taking like hot bread right out of the oven and putting butter on it, it is my favorite. And the Kerrygold has way more nutrients in it for you as well as just regular butter. But that's another topic. So that is the health benefits of it.
So So the reason we're teaching this class today is because sourdough is an awesome thing to have in your repertoire for emergency situations. Obviously, the reason it took off in 2020 is, I don't know if you guys remember trying to buy conventional yeast at the beginning of the pandemic, but it was like you could drive an hour away and like maybe still not find it at a grocery store. It was really hard to find conventional yeast. And that is when I started sourdough. And I was telling Ashlan that I look back on some of the loaves that I baked in that, and I was like, those are terrible. But guess what? They still tasted good. So like, even when you're first getting started with sourdough, you're not going to be at an expert level unless like you're just a savant with sourdough, and that's fine. But like, even getting started, it's still going to be great right off the bat. But the best part of that is like if there's even like not a massive scale emergency situation like the pandemic again or anything worse than that, even we're starting to have more food shortages just in the world that we live in. If there's ever a yeast shortage again, you can still make bread and have that, and the sourdough bread's going to have more nutrients for your family anyway, so it's awesome. You can start your starter now. Keep it in your fridge, even if you're not using it very often. I know some people have left their starter in their fridge for a very long time and are still able to revive it. I didn't try that. I was like, just dump it out. I don't want to see it because then I'm going to feel guilt and shame, and I am already dealing with a newborn and I'll have all those feelings already, so get it out of here. But you start your starter now, you're going to have it for emergency situations. And you can also dry your starter. So if there's directions, wonderful directions on the internet But if you take your starter and when it's active and like spread it out over a piece of parchment paper and let it dry, it is still active starter, and you can that. You can, I don't know if you can freeze it.
I don't know actually. Probably
Google that.
maybe.
I'm gonna
I think
Google that
probably could.
later. But you can keep that starter, especially like if you're ever just like not thinking and you use all of your starter for a recipe and then you're like, wait, I didn't keep some of that starter to feed. You'll have more starter, or hopefully you have some recent discard in your fridge to start a starter again. I've done that before. But you can have dried starter and you just rehydrate it and feed it, and you've got a starter again. So that's an awesome pantry situation for emergencies. And like Ashlan was saying, the best part is it's so minimal for what you need to make a loaf of bread. There are other breads that are going to take more ingredients with sourdough, but your basic bread is flour, water, starter, which is flour and water, and salt. And you've got a loaf of bread, and it's awesome. So it's wonderful for emergency situations.
And on top of that too, with a starter, I guarantee like somebody you know has a starter. They sell, like I know like Food Nanny and stuff, you can get like dehydrated starter. Yeah, the dried starter. I think that just takes a long time to build up. Honestly, if you can just like get it from somebody that's already ready and healthy, I think that's
starter.
the best.
You can
Me
ask
too.
me.
Anybody wants any of ours, we have the same starter.
Yes.
If anybody say that, like we can give it to you. It's so easy to just dump it.
And it's a really good starter. Ashlan did a good job. It's a very happy starter.
So I feel like that's easier. You can do either way. If you're like, oh, I really want to try this from the ground up, then do it. I just think it's a long process. But yeah, so either way on that works. Okay, so what you'll need, everything that you'll need to make a loaf of bread, and I'm just more going to talk about just the basic sourdough, which is what I mostly make just because it's simple. For your starter, you would need 2 mason jars. So you're always going to keep your starter in here, and then when you feed it, you're going to transfer it to another mason jar. So I'm just always going back and forth between the mason jars. I like to get the bigger ones because I use the discard, which we'll talk about in a sec, to make pancakes, waffles, so many things. I never ever hardly throw away my starter. I always just reuse it for other things in the morning, which is super simple. And then, so food scale. You're gonna need a scale that does grams. Any recipe that you look up with sourdough is usually always gonna tell you it in grams, like what you add with your flour and your water. So you'll need a food scale.
Which might ruin you for other baking because you're like, 3/4 cup, like how well are you packing this? Why don't you just give it to me in grams?
So true. So true. The other thing you'll need is a dough scraper. So I have, either one of these work. This one I love Auto Ballerina Farms, but I love her. She's like my idol, my dream life. But I use most of her stuff. But either one, this one's more bendy, this one's harder. But either way, we'll show you kind of how you're going to shape it today with these. And then you'll need a proofing basket, which looks like this. They also have proofing baskets that you can make like sandwich loaves. It's like in a sandwich loaf shape, and you'll make that the exact same way. You're just going to shape it more in a sandwich loaf instead of a circle. A bread lame. Cool. It just cuts it. That's like when you see the breads that have all the pretty flowers on it. This is what you use. And then you're going to need a large Dutch oven, cast iron, and it has to be heavy because when you cook it, it's gonna like keep the heat in the bread, and that's what makes the bread rise. You want it heavy with a heavy lid.
Can I say something really quick about mice? So for a long time, I thought that scoring your loaf when you cut it with the lame, it was purely aesthetic. But like you actually have to make a deep enough cut that it's called oven spring when your loaf like rises all the way, and you will not get your full oven spring if you don't score your bread.
Totally. Yep, that's exactly right. I don't really do the designs. I just do like a big X, and it's perfect.
Yeah. So it's more than just looks.
Yep, it's exactly right. The other thing too that's not on there is you'll need parchment paper. So we'll show you after you proof your bread, after you shape it and proof it, then you're going to dump it on parchment paper, and that's what you're going to put into your Dutch oven as well. And that seems like a lot, but that is it.
Okay, so with your starter needs to be active, and that means you've fed it and it has doubled in size at least. It needs to be active to use it in most recipes. The other recipes are called discard recipes, and basically you're making recipes with what you've taken out of your starter and you don't need anymore. And we'll get to some of those. For a new starter, you want to feed it every day for a few days. until it raises easily. So if your starter is not doubling within, did we put this on here, like 4 to 6 hours, would you say?
Yeah.
At like a normal temperature kitchen, it's not ready to bake with yet, and you need to keep feeding it every day. There are, like I was saying earlier, you can feed it rye flour that can help strengthen the starter a little bit too. I haven't done that yet, but I know that that's a really popular flour to use when you're establishing your starter. The more often you feed your starter, the healthier it will be. So if you've let it sit for a long time, you're going to want to feed it for a little while before using it. So that's where it does start to get fickle, is you can't just bake a loaf of sourdough on the fly unless you're keeping your starter active. You got to plan ahead. And even when your starter is active, if you want a loaf of sourdough, you kind of need to know that at least 24 hours in advance so you can get started on it. Which sounds like a lot, but a lot of it is like hands-off time. So it's really okay, I promise. We would suggest feeding your starter at least once a week. If you're going on vacation for 2 weeks, it's gonna be okay. But like in just normal time, get it out of the fridge once a week, feed it, make something with your discard, really like make a loaf, because it's wonderful, why wouldn't you? But it's gonna be okay to just feed it once a week and put it back in the fridge after it's become active. So you can keep your starter in the fridge and maybe feed it every other week. Yeah, I think we got that. If you are going on a long vacation, I've done this before where I've had a friend feed my starter while I'm gone because I want it to be active. So it's like, water my plants, feed my sourdough starter, and my cat, I guess she needs food too. But your starter is like the key to your success with sourdough. So you want to take good care of it. It is like a plant, basically. It's a living organism. Mine is named Trixie, and my kids call it Trixie, and all the time they're like, can we feed Trixie? Can we see Trixie? It's kind of weird, but so that's, can we keep going on this one? Yeah. There are different feed ratios. Wait.
And on top, to go with what she's saying here,
Oh, this is
either way, it doesn't matter. But either way, like, people get so caught up in like the ratios and numbers. I will tell you, like, it does not really matter what you do. Like, don't be like, oh my gosh, I have to do 30, 60, 60 or whatever you want to do. Honestly, I do mine all even. A lot of times I'll just dump it all in there and mix it. Like, starter is super resilient, way more resilient than you think. Truly, I've left my starter in the fridge for like months and I'm able to revive it in just a couple days. It's super resilient, so don't get super caught up in like the numbers. But to feed it, we'll just really quick go over how you feed it. So this right here, I know it's going to be a little hard to see. This is not this is not active starter at all. So this is what it'll look like once you haven't fed it. So this is like, hasn't been fed in a week.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't have the like topping on it yet, but it's still not bubbly. So when you feed it, you're gonna do it on the scale. You're gonna dump your starter in first, and then reset it. Do the grams of water, so whatever ratio you want to do. This is going to, you'd add 30 grams of starter, and then you're going to add 125 grams of, if you do warm water, the bacteria really, really loves that. So you do warm filtered water. I mix mine at that point right after, and then I'll add the flour, and then you mix that all together. That is all you do when your starter is fed. And then you're just going to wait. I always do mine at night. So before I go to bed, I'll feed my starter, leave it on my counter overnight. By the morning, it's completely doubled and bubbly and ready to make bread. It's that simple. I know it kind of sounds confusing, but it's really just at night, just feed it, leave it on your counter, it'll be ready and bubbly the next day to make bread. And you'll know, like she said, you'll know, it has to double in size and you'll just see it bubbly and healthy. If the morning it still looks like this, it's not healthy, it's not ready to make bread.
Some people will put like rubber bands on the outside of their jar at the beginning mark. I use a dry erase marker on the outside of the glass jar if I really like. If I'm like, I need that starter the second that it's ready, then I'll watch it. I don't do that all the time though. I just wait until the next morning or, yeah.
And then also on top of that, so if I'm dumping 30 grams of this into my mason jar, this is way more than 30 grams. So then the leftover would be your discard. So then I would take the discard and make something else for pancakes, like overnight batter for pancakes. So that's when you would use your discard, because you're not always going to use all of your starter to feed it.
And you can put your discard in the fridge. How long do you let discard go in the fridge before using it? I've used it at like a week and it's been okay.
Probably fine. Yeah.
But it gets.
What's the difference between your discard and your starter?
So your discard is an inactive starter. It's not ready to bake with, and you don't need it So like she said, she's feeding her starter, and what becomes the new starter in this jar is now your starter, and everything left over in this is discard.
Does that make
You
sense?
don't add flour and water anything to your discard.
So what I do, this is typically my nightly routine. I'll feed my starter, and then what I have left over here, I will use for overnight pancakes. So then I will take my discard and put it in another bowl and mix like milk, yogurt. I can't remember. There's like milk, yogurt, and sugar. I think a little bit of sugar that I'll mix in it, and then that'll sit overnight, and that's gonna ferment overnight and be ready to make pancakes the next morning. Does that make sense? I know
But
it's
if
kind of
we
confusing.
don't want to do like a pancake or something, you can't just go sit in the fridge for some weeks.
Yeah, it can sit in there. I usually leave it for up to a week for discard. So if you can fed your starter's in the new jar, what's in the old jar is discard. You can put that back in your fridge and use it another day. I just wouldn't let it go for more than a week because it's gonna start to develop a film on the top. Sourdough people call it hooch. And that, it actually protects the bacteria, the yeast inside, but you'll want to pour it off. And it starts to get real tangy after a week for the discard. So I use it within a week, but you can use it, we'll talk about some different things that you can use your discard for.
Or you can just throw it away. A lot of people literally just feed their starter and dump it.
Don't put it down your sink though, it is like cement.
It is. It's true. Yes. put
And
it in
it's
trash.
okay. I know some people get really particular about not even washing their sourdough stuff in the sink. I don't go that far, and I haven't had problems. You just want to use a lot of water when you're washing sourdough stuff because it does harden.
Yes.
So you don't want to mess up.
This is like a good example on here. It's literally like rock hard.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
So just use a good amount of water when you're washing it, and get as much of it into the garbage before. So different things that you can bake with sourdough. If it's a yeasted bread, you can make it sourdough, and I guarantee there's a recipe for it somewhere on the internet. So I've actually started printing off some different things, just so I can kind of have a little recipe book of different things that I can make sourdough with. But obviously the most common one is just a bowl, and that's like the artisan loaf, the really pretty round one. You can also I do soft sourdough sandwich bread a lot that has coconut oil in it, and it does have an egg in it, and a little bit of honey. I don't like mine too sweet, but some of the recipes have a lot of honey in them for sandwich bread. You can do baguettes. You could do it in these Banneton baskets. They come in long ones, like Ashlan was saying, or you can just kind of freehand it. I have a baguette pan that I can do them in. I have a really great rolls recipe too that is not, I don't think anything is really added to it, maybe some butter, but makes really nice soft rolls. And with that, I had a QR code that I was going to bring today with a link to some recipes that we like, and I forgot it. So if you want some recipes, we'll get a piece of paper up here, and you can write down your email address, and we'll send you that link. This was the focaccia. You can do cinnamon rolls, but really, like, if it's something that uses conventional yeast, I guarantee you there's a recipe somewhere for it to use natural yeast, which is sourdough. So.
Okay, so I know we're kind of like short on time, so we'll try to go through this pretty quick and ask questions along the way if it doesn't make sense. This is how you're going to start your bread. So I told you that night you're going to feed your starter. When you wake up in the morning, that's when it's going to be doubled in size and ready to make your bread. This is what you're going to do at this point the next morning. You're going to dump, so you're going to you're going to get a big bowl. You're going to dump 225 grams of your bubbly active starter into the bowl, and then you're going to do 735 grams of warm water. I then mix that together. I always mix my starter and water together first before I add the flour. Then you're gonna add 1,000 grams of unbleached flour, and then 24 grams of salt, like what she's saying. And then I personally mix all of that together with my hands. A lot of people don't love that. You can use whatever you want, any type of mixer. I like to do it with my hands because I just feel like I really can get it all in there. You really want the flour to soak in the liquids. And then at that point, it's basically going to look like this. And then you're gonna let it sit. I don't know what the next slide is. Perfect. Okay, yeah. I'm just gonna keep going on this one. And then Okay, yeah, so you're gonna mix really well, and then you're gonna let it sit on your counter for about 15 to 30 minutes, and we'll have all this. Like, if you guys want us to email it to you, we have a whole, it's like this amazing sheet that literally has all of this. You can look back on it. And then you're gonna let it sit on your counter for 15 to 30 minutes, and then you're gonna do your first, these are called stretch and folds. This is what is gonna develop the gluten in your bread. So you're gonna get your hands, it's better, you wanna get your hands a little bit wet, and then you're gonna take it out like this. And this is a stretch and fold. So right now this bread is super loose. You can see I can pull it apart like pretty easily. So you're just gonna stretch it and fold it together. Then you're gonna keep it on the same side. You're gonna stretch it, and then eventually you're gonna feel it kind of start to fight you. So it's gonna get tougher and tougher. That's when you don't wanna rip your bread. So you just wanna gently keep stretching and folding it. And once it kind of says, okay, I'm done, you'll know, then you just leave it on, put it back in there, and you're gonna leave it on the counter. You're gonna do a stretch and fold every 2 hours. Yeah, so then you're gonna cover it, let it rest on the counter, and then I usually do mine like every 1 to 2 hours. You're gonna do another stretch and fold. Yeah, and that's just gonna keep developing the gluten, and this is also the fermenting process. The longer it sits on your counter, the more it's gonna ferment.
That kind of stressed me out a little bit at first.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, I'm not going to be around all day to do that. You can speed up the stretch and fold process. You could do it over a 2-hour process, like 4 times every 30 minutes or so, and that's going to be okay.
Again, it's like so resilient. There's no like perfect way to do this, and it's gonna turn out great truly. Even if you don't, there's times where I literally like have done 1 stretch and fold, and it still turns out great. Like, it is not a big deal at all.
Is there like a rule, like how many, too many stretch and folds, or like,
I mean, the only risk would be that you're going to overproof your dough if you wait too long, and it'll end up falling more.
Yeah.
But
And the more stretch and fold, I think you're just creating more gluten as well.
Yeah.
So if you want less gluten, then do less stretch and folds.
and a good way to test, like if you are at a good place, it's called the window pane test. So if you take a small piece and stretch it out to the point that you can like see through it and it doesn't rip, your gluten's strong enough.
Yes. Okay, and then after you've done a couple stretch and folds, now you're gonna go into the shaping part of it, where you're gonna shape your bread how you want. I can't really show you on here. I do it just on a counter. You're gonna do it with no flour because you want it to stick, but you're essentially just gonna make it. This is obviously not gonna work very well, but this is when you're gonna use your scraper. You're gonna basically take the dough, put it on your counter, and I'll send you guys too. If anybody wants to put their emails, I'll send you an amazing video that shows you the best way to shape it, because there is a little bit of an art to it. You're just basically trying to make the top trying to make a ball as tight as possible. So you'll start to see as you're shaping it little bubbles forming on the top. That's when you'll know it's ready, but there is a little art to it. Again, we'll send you a video because I can't really it's hard to explain, but you're just gonna shape it into a circle, make it super tight, and then that's when you're gonna flip it into your proofing basket upside down. Again, the video will explain better. And then you're gonna go and that'll be your proofing stage. That's when it's gonna kind of rise a little bit. Yeah, into your proofing basket. And yeah, so you'll let it sit and proof for about 2 to 3 hours. That I found is like the perfect time.
You can do that longer though, in the fridge.
Yes.
If you're leaving it out for a long time, you're gonna overproof it.
Totally.
But letting it sit in the fridge for longer, like even up to 24 hours, would you say?
Yep. Yep.
That is going to continue to develop the yeast. It's gonna, more probiotics. It's gonna be more of a sour flavor though, the longer that you go on that. So if you don't enjoy a super sour sourdough, you're gonna wanna do a shorter proof.
And if you know you're not going to be home all day, like if you don't want to do this all in one day, you can stretch it out for like over 3 days and do everything in the fridge. So you can ferment it in the fridge for I think up to 48 hours and then proof it in the fridge for up to 24 hours. So it's very flexible. If you do it in the fridge, you can take, more time. Sorry, I'm trying to go through this as quick as I can. And then you're ready to make your bread. You're going to put your Dutch oven in the oven while it's preheating. So you're going to set it to 450. Make sure this is in there. You want your Dutch oven to be extremely hot before you put your bread in.
Without the parchment.
Yes.
Because the parchment is part of the bread.
Yes, perfect. And then you're gonna just cut off a piece of parchment paper, kind of like that big, put it on your counter, and then you're gonna flip, so your bread is in here, it's been proofed, you're gonna flip it onto the parchment paper, and then that's when you're gonna score it. Like this. I just do an X. You wanna do it maybe about like 2 inches deep, I would say. I honestly just do a big X. And then you're gonna pick it up. When your oven is preheated to 450, then you're gonna put the bread in the Dutch oven just like so. Put the lid on. You're gonna cook it with the lid on for 25 minutes, and then you take the lid off, and I cook it for about 15 minutes, and that's what gets it kind of crunchy on the top and brown, which I like, And then it is ready.
This seems like
And
so
then you
much,
have
but
to be
it's so easy.
patient.
You do.
Because when it comes out of the oven, like normal bread, you want to cut into it and have a like slice when it's hot, right? If you cut into sourdough when it comes out of the oven, it like
squishes like this.
Yeah,
This was
it's-
not ready yet.
it's
but-
gonna get like a gummy texture to it. So you want to let it cool for like an hour. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not that patient, but yes.
Depends how
Probably
presentable
should.
you want your loaf to be. I've definitely cut mine at like a half hour, 20 minutes, and
Yeah.
it's okay. But if you want it to be a beautiful crumb on the inside, let it cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And that is it.
We'll run out. There's some common mistakes really quickly, and we'll go through them so fast. So baking before your starter is active. Using water that is too hot or too cold. With the whole thing of like the starter likes warm water. It doesn't like hot water though. That's going to kill it. So it's like a baby bottle. You want it to be, you know, your wrist. Impatience. If you need bread today, you're just going to use your commercial yeast. Don't try to rush a sourdough loaf. Not letting the gluten fully develop with your stretches and folds. Not forming your loaf properly. You really do need that tension to it that helps it also get the oven spring. And not scoring deep enough, not baking long enough, not letting it rest long enough, not storing it properly. Sourdough actually does best in like a paper bag, actually. Just put my hand in the nose, sorry. If you were to put a loaf of sourdough in a Ziploc bag or a plastic bag while it is still warm at like even a tiny bit, it makes it gummy also. It's gonna hydrate it too much. And then like tap water, table salt are no-nos. Yeah. And there's so many uses for discard, and we'll include some of those recipes in that as well. But she likes to make pancakes. I love making waffles with it. We make crackers. It adds a good like tangy flavor to whatever you're using. You can add it into brownies, banana bread. It also, once flour is hydrated, it likes hydration. So when you add discard into something, it's going to add moisture because it like pulls moisture into it. So it's almost like adding like buttermilk to something. It's going to make the crumb moist. Sorry, any questions?
Can we have them ask you questions?
Yes.
After so we can get to the next
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.
Yes.
So
Awesome.
does anyone happen to have a paper that we can put email addresses on?
Or we could put it in my